Anderson, they both looked at Ezra, and named Ezra Nehemiah. And Anderson's background is she was a lawyer before she entered biblical studies, so she dealt with anti-miscegenation laws as a way of looking at Ezra's getting rid of foreign women. And Ruiz looked at what happens in a post-colonial context when people start building, as happens in Nehemiah, but also how that played out in Brooklyn.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question before you go on. So this started in the new millennium. This project started. You talked about twice. Once you said they weren't allowed, and once you said they had never done this before. Why do you think it's taken until the new millennium for persons of minority to get together and do this kind of thing?
Well, for one thing, we've been in low numbers. At this point, when I graduated in the 80s, there were less than 30 black PhDs in both Testaments combined. And now we have over 60, but still.
Right.
And like I said, that the first Latina to get a degree in New Testament graduated 3 years ago. And so so part of it has been that the academy hasn't been willing to train us.
Right.
And if they did train us, like my generation of black biblical scholars, those of us who had degrees, we were either the only person in the program, or there were two of us in the program, and we were the one that made it.
Right. And
then the question came, as some of us were told, if the other Negroes were like y'all, things would be better. And some of us believed that, and others kept looking for other black folk to talk to. On the other hand, one of the dynamics in this work was that the Latinos and the Asians kept wanting to use the word ethnicity. They didn't want to use the word race.
Oh, okay.
And that was it created for some problems for discussion. When Yee presented her model minority thing, the black folk kept saying, "Yeah, but you got to problematize that," So, but at least opened the door for us to start looking, in different directions and ask different questions. Gabe Byron did an excellent piece on terms of text criticism in New Testament. Preference is usually given to the Western text,
right.
And as the trajectory goes to Roman, she shows how there were, and in Ethiopia there was already an empire, and there were already texts. Why is it that we have discarded that, and what's at the base of in biblical studies are discarding it? Frank Yamada is a Japanese American who one of his parents was white, and he deals with the Garden of Eden as a way of looking at what happened to the Japanese Americans in World War II. And the expulsion from the garden,
right.
and all. And so what's been interesting in the reviews of the book have been that people have said, I wish I had this in my introduction to Bible course, because it opens up different questions and different ways of looking at it. There are two pieces in there, one by Benny Liu and myself. Liu had done a review of Ken Stone's Queer Bible Commentary. And in his review, he said, "Are there no queers of color?" And I read that, and I called him and said, "Benny, neither one of us have any out gays or lesbians in our delegation. What are we going to do?" And so what we ended up doing was, he said, all of the out gays and lesbians in the Asian circles were in theology, or history. They weren't in biblical studies. And,
right.
It didn't work in terms of African Americans. So he and I both did queer readings along with it. So he does. The Word becomes flesh and dwells among us. Well, Greco-Roman context, logos is masculine. It's intellectual. It's rational. It's in control. Sarx, flesh, is feminine, subtle, sensuous. So to say the logos became sarx, is a transgender, could be viewed as a transgendering process. And the whole Sophia strain and all. So he teases that out in terms of what happens with that in the Gospel of John and how ethnicity also plays into it. My piece is on the book of Esther, in which I argue that, like in the first line, it says the king of Persia who controlled 120 provinces from India to Ethiopia. And most historical critical works look at that and say, was there ever a time that Persia really controlled that long? And how many provinces? I said, hey, y'all, I mean, it really looks like the book was written in Greco-Roman times, and it's, a polemic against the Greeks, but they couldn't talk about the Greeks, so they retroject it. But they say, from India to Ethiopia, which is saying, hey, the empires used to be from the south. These northern empires, that are coming down now, they're late to the empire game. So it's a way of signifying on the Romans. And then the king is presented homoerotically, and Mordecai ends up being portrayed homoerotically, and Esther becomes queen by outperforming all the other women in bed, and so it seems that part of what the book is saying is that not only are the Greeks no good, and it uses sexuality to do that, but the Jews that cooperate with them, they no good either, because they're just as bad. And the problem, I conclude, the problem is that whoever wrote it didn't realize it was going to be in the Bible. And once you put it in the Bible, people are convinced that there's no sex in the Bible. And translators have translated in a way to obfuscate it. Secondly, whenever you see Jew, we're supposed to like those characters, and we're not supposed to question what it is that they're doing. And so, and there were some problems in the group, because some of the people were saying, yeah, but they're talking about the empire, and we're supposed to talk bad about the empire. I say, yeah, but we ain't got to use sexuality as a way of doing it. So the project was good in that it helped us to, in fact, move beyond traditional boundaries of I can do historical criticism or literary criticism. Got us more into literary, but also into the ideological sphere. Got us into post-colonial questions, and enabled us to bring. When people read, it's like with the, and this isn't in the book, but like with the wedding at Cana, the only people that know what's going on are the slaves who are carrying the bottles for the buckets for Jesus. And Jesus, nobody else knows. But we never preach that from the standpoint of what's happening with the folk at the bottom. We essentially read with the people at the top, and and the text is really written from that perspective of, we're supposed to want to be engrafted into Abraham. Besides the fact that he pimps Sarah, he rapes Hagar, So what this allowed us to do is to start opening up questions in terms of, well, why is Israel always favored over other nations? What's with this? Why is there? What do we do with social class issues? What do we do with use of people's bodies for production of labor, and they don't get any benefit of it? And how do our own stories of living in diaspora in this country help us to have different questions about the text and different questions, different ways of reading the text.
This goes right into what I wanted to ask next, which is I wanted to quote you something from the preface, which deals with, this is an interesting title, hopefully we will edit this in so you'll be able to see it more clearly, this structure here. You're talking about the title page, what it's meant to signify. Like a fire, minority biblical scholarship defies containment, whether attempted by whites or persons of color. Various sparks within the fire represent not only the multiple locations of minority biblical criticism, but also the varied illuminations it may shed on the Bible. Like the book cover, biblical criticism, minority or not, is an art that, as Odette Lockwood Stewart reminds us, requires creativity as well as courage and may function at times to disturb and destabilize. And now my question is, on that disturb and destabilize, is it sounds like two things are going on here. There's an attempt to disturb and destabilize, but also seeking the truth has a tendency to disturb you and destabilize you. What can you speak more to disturb and destabilize?
Well, part of it is, and I think it really goes back to reading theory, that most of us think that there's only one way to interpret a text, and there's only one meaning, and what is the meaning? Mm-hmm. And especially those of us who have gone through dissertation processes, where the first couple of chapters we have to review all the literature that's ever been done and say they were all wrong, but I got the right answer.
Right.
You know, and so to allow for having different readings stand together and both be valid becomes a very disturbing thing for the church, who wants to use the book of the Bible as a control mechanism, as though there's only one meaning. There's only one true way of looking